By our very nature, we are attracted to our history. Countless different adventures spread over the course of ages. From the legionnaires of the Roman Republic to the samurai of the shogunate. It calls us out, no matter how far we run away from it. And you? What would you like to be?
I like that too.
For me, I wish I lived in a period where I could leave my job, hop on a ship, go to Chile, learn some Spanish, visit some natives, rally the said natives, and declare myself the king of a country the size of Western Europe. Sounds crazy, isn't it? Stupid, even. Well, guess what? That stupid fellow was named Antoine de Tounens, the king of the kingdom of Araucania and Patagonia, born on May 12, 1825, to a fairly well-off farmer family in the town of Chourignac in the Kingdom of France. Since he was little, Tounens was a special kid, maybe a bit too special. Just like many other Frenchmen of his time who were influenced by Napoleon, he had aspirations of being a great leader. Furthermore, he notably had difficulty distinguishing between reality and absurd fantasy, which would only land him in interesting circumstances. Later in his life, Tounens would be diagnosed by the authorities with monomania, a mental condition characterized by intense focus on a particular objective. His goal was to become the king of a kingdom, a native kingdom to be exact. He was obsessed with the stories of the distant, stories about natives inhabiting the exotic lands untamed by the white man, where they would struggle against the aggression of the said white man. More on that in a bit. He graduated from law school in 1850, and as a lawyer, he had a somewhat successful career as a middle-class Frenchman at the time. He also became a Freemason with the hopes of propagating his ideas for the future of his country. To put it extremely mildly, France by the 1850s was not a calm place. After a series of military defeats, unstable governments, and revolutions, the country finally calmed down when President Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte, the nephew of Emperor Napoleon, overthrew the Republic in a self-coup and declared himself Emperor Napoleon III. France, like the rest of Europe, was engulfed in nationalistic fever with a strong desire to establish a colonial empire, especially after losing all their colonies after the Napoleonic Wars, as they wanted to occupy all the empty places on the map before anyone else. And as a Frenchman, Tounens looked at the map. He realized that a massive amount of territory in South America was still uncontrolled and was only inhabited by the tribal natives. And even though Chile and Argentina had claims on these regions, they had no actual control. So who cares what they think? He saw an opportunity. Why doesn't France help the natives in this region establish their own local kingdoms who would in turn become a part of the French Empire? He probably felt like a genius after coming up with this idea, so much so that he would go to his lodge and start presenting his idea of creating a new France. Following this, he was promptly ignored and his ideas were never taken seriously. Still, Tounens was not your typical human male. He was not someone who would be discouraged by pointless ideas such as practicality or logical thinking. But he was let down by the lack of support he received for his vision. Tounens determined that he would go down there and create the kingdom himself should no one else be interested in his project. And just like any other reasonable man who got successful early on in his life, he sold his law firm and then began borrowing money from banks. And with his own liquidated fortune, Tounens was ready to give up the high life to become a king on the edge of the world. In 1858, after leaving his dog to a friend, he departed for Valparaiso, Chile under the guise of scientific research and to learn Spanish. Tounens wanted to establish a little life of his own before moving south. And for his credit, he picked up Spanish fast and began making connections all around, especially with the French community in Chile. He also tried to go after some business ventures, but these went nowhere. By the end of 1859, Tounens started to run out of money and he was still nowhere near becoming a king, which was utterly unacceptable. To make matters worse, the country got caught in a civil war the same year, so he was basically stuck in Chile. But during this time, Tounens started hearing rather curious news from the south. Apparently seizing the chance presented by the Civil War, the Mapuche tribes of the Araucanía region to the south of Chile attacked. Now, this wasn't the first time Tounens heard of the Mapuche or the Araucanía. He had read about this stuff for years by this point, particularly the book La Araucana by Alonso de Ercilla, based off the Spanish conquest of Araucanía and the battle against Mapuches in a romantic manner. This one had a profound impact on Tounens, who apparently sympathized more with the Mapuche than the protagonists themselves. However, now, the Mapuche were facing a danger unlike anything else before. The Chile. Tounens felt that it was at last the time to travel to the south and personally see the almighty Mapuche warriors by himself. And so he did. It sure sucks not being white. You tell me about it. I do sometimes wish a flight Frenchman who is sympathetic to us would travel all the way here and voluntarily become our king. Well, that is a strangely specific thing to ask for, but I see. But who would even be insane enough to think of such a thing? Bonjour, my fellow brown people. So I came across an epic poem written by some man who lived 3 centuries ago, and he describes a specific magnificent Mapuche tribe living here. Do you know where they might be yet? Gentlemen, I believe we have the man. So, a quick history lesson. The Mapuche are, first of all, fiercely independent people. They fought against the spread of the Inca Empire well before the arrival of the Europeans, and following the Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire within a few years, the locals resisted and waged guerrilla war. Leading this war was the Mapuche, who utterly rejected any kind of Spanish rule and set off the Arauco War, which lasted for the next 200 plus years. This war saw some of the most violent fighting of the Spanish conquest of America, even more so than the Inca Empire itself. Even after the region was mostly pacified by the 1700s, the Mapuche were never truly absorbed into the Spanish Empire and were deliberately kept outside of the Spanish frontier. Even though the Spanish and later the Chileans attempted to construct settlements, the Mapuche's violent attacks almost always thwarted any colonial ambition. Even after the Spanish had withdrawn, tensions with the Chileans remained high in the 1800s, with periodic rebellions and attacks being commonplace. The Mapuche persisted in their 300-year guerrilla war till the very end. They truly wanted to keep what little autonomy they had and were concerned that subordination to the Chileans would result in the tribes losing their way of life. To be honest, Mapuche is deserving of a video, but let's stick to the topic. Anton de Tounens decided to visit Araucanía in October 1860 with a small circle of companions. He would quickly establish contact with the Mapuche tribe's chiefs, with Chief Toki Quilapan in particular, explicitly conveying his intentions to them. And surprisingly, they were remarkably open to his ideas and immediately accepted his goals for an independent Araucanía. As it turns out, the Mapuche chiefs already wanted a foreign monarch to come to their aid and rescue them from the Chileans. And that monarch of choice was none other than the King of Spain. But after learning that he was not available, they decided to settle down with a random Frenchman. Now, to be fully honest, little Anton was not the finest fit for a king in a Native American nation in South America. He lacked solid plans to save Araucania and experience in government leadership. Even more honestly, he was just a 35-year-old French lawyer with way too much free time on his hands. But one thing that set him apart wasn't his knowledge or charisma, it was the lack of pigment on his skin. You see, it wasn't as if the Mapuche couldn't simply choose one of their own to be their monarch and declare statehood. At the time, Africa was full of countries like that, and you can see what happened to them. This was the brutal truth of the 19th century geopolitics, where racism, and I mean actual textbook racism, wasn't just an opinion or attitude or ideology, but simply the norm. Any type of territorial claim or title you could have had, if you were a non-white, non-Christian head of state at this time, had the same political value as a used toilet paper, which Europeans could readily toss into their garbage can, and threw it to the garbage can they did. This was called the Discovery Doctrine, which at the time made it illegal to claim the realms and colonies of other Christian rulers, which effectively gave the green light to Europeans to conquer all of these lands. Except for Ethiopia, which was on the shaky grounds. Back to the point. It was glaringly evident that Mapuche would not be able to hold back the Chileans off. Essentially, this meant a death sentence for them since they were still centuries behind European development. This is why, if you are a native in the 19th century and see a Frenchman from the other side of the world coming over and asking to be the king of your country, that man is probably your best hope. Tounens claimed to the Mapuche that he was the only man on earth who could save the natives from falling to the Chilean occupation. He promised the chiefs that he could not only contact the French authorities, but he also could arrange the delivery of guns and supplies, in exchange for the region becoming a French protectorate. Impressed with his promises, the chiefs declared Antony de Tounens, the Great Toki, the supreme chieftain of the Mapuche. Things were going smoothly for Tounens, and absolutely nothing could go wrong. Tounens would immediately turn to building a state from the ground up. He would appoint his French pals and Mapuche chiefs as ministers, create government offices, and even drafted a constitution modeled after the French one. This new country would have its own flag, a royal seal, a royal anthem, a national parliament with deputies democratically elected, and a capital city of Angol. And to top it all off, on November 17, 1860, Tounens crowned himself King Orélie-Antoine I on 4 separate occasions. And to top even that off, he would go on to claim sovereignty over the entire region of Patagonia, despite having virtually no influence over the area whatsoever. I guess he just got carried away. He would then send his proclamation to newspapers in Chile, and even a letter to the president, informing him that from now on everything south of his borders was now his. His position was truly secure. And by secure, I mean not secure at all. His proclamation did not get the response he had hoped for. For the entirety of 1861, Tounens was just a Frenchman in native costume in the middle of nowhere playing king while trying to draw support for his cause. He requested backing from the French government, but considering what he had to show at the time, it shouldn't be surprising to know that the answer wasn't positive. But believe it or not, the French consul in Chile did actually consider taking his offer seriously, but after a brief consideration, he concluded that this guy was probably just insane and would fail anyway. Tounen battled to create a functional state with a tiny circle of friends and tribal chiefs, and it quickly became evident that constructing a modern state would require, modern people. On top of that, he wasn't in possession of a large army or anything, so his rule kind of depended on the enthusiasm of his subjects more than anything else. His erratic personality also did not help, as the Mapuche started to suspect that this raving lunatic didn't have the best plan in mind, as he continued to beg the French for assistance while the natives were preparing for the invasion. Meanwhile, the reaction of Chile and Argentina came shortly after the declaration of independence. No. Tounen desperately tried to reach a solution and even returned to Valparaiso with the hopes of meeting with the Chilean government. He met no one and went back to the south shortly after. In fact, the declaration only ended up causing the Chilean president to order Colonel Cornelio Saavedra Rodriguez to launch an invasion of Araucania and occupy the region and dissolve the kingdom. The Chilean forces even put a bounty on Tounen's head, dead or alive. Maybe you should have arrested him when he was in your country, but who am I to judge? With the hopes of a peace deal out of the window, Tounen was ready to fight till the end with or without foreign support. This was either his moment to shine or die trying it. Well, this wouldn't matter, as eventually, on January 5th, 1862, Tounen was captured and arrested by Chileans with the help of a Mapuche servant who ended up betraying him. He was put on trial, where he personally defended himself quite successfully for 9 months straight. He was facing the death penalty, and in an unusual twist of events, the court couldn't find any crimes committed by Tounen that would amount to a death penalty. Therefore, they took the simple route, declaring him insane and confining him to a madhouse as punishment. And after a year in the madhouse out of pity, the French authorities ended up helping him get out. He would soon return to France as a free man. But those who thought he would just give up on becoming a king were dead wrong. The Araucania was still under occupation, and as the king, he thought that he was obliged to go back to his realm and help it reclaim it from the Chileans. Soon after arriving in Paris, he immediately started to lobby for his cause. He often met with nobles, telling his stories and explaining his grand project. He would go on to borrow even more debt from the banks, launch some legally dubious monetary operations with crooked financiers to garner more money, and even distribute royal titles and privileges in exchange for money and support. Shockingly, his project ended up receiving the support of some high-ranking officials, including the Minister of Finance. Later, with the assistance of his buddies from the Masonic Lodge, Tounen would set up a meeting with the French foreign minister with the hopes of finally receiving the government support he had yearned for years. And as you can imagine, the meeting didn't go well, as the minister shortly came to the conclusion that Tounen was not in a healthy state of mind. Tounen, on the other hand, clearly unable to read the room, would try to arrange a meeting with the emperor for the next couple of months, as he was seemingly convinced that he could easily persuade him if he were to get a hold of him. The meeting would never come. He was devastated. Again, the poor guy just couldn't catch a break, and to make matters worse, the media picked up on the story. The newspapers started to pump out headlines, articles, and comics, as Tounen became a national sensation in the worst way imaginable. He was given the nickname Available King. He became something of a celebrity in France, if being a media punching bag counts as one. Tounen, on the other hand, rolled with a newly acquired fame, kind of. He wrote down his memories and fiercely defended his public reputation, which proved to be a great source of entertainment for the French high class. For the next 6 years, Tounen spent his days as a king without a kingdom. He not only continued to lobby, but also became something of a proto-human rights activist, trying to get the French into believing that a man's right of self-determination shouldn't be trashed because he's not white. But in the end, he managed to get enough support to organize a second expedition. It was finally time to go back. 1869, Tounen jumped on a ship sailing to Buenos Aires, and in March of that year, he traveled to Patagonia on a French Navy vessel that was kind enough to give him a ride. Tounen wandered off into the wild and quickly started making friends among the native tribals in Patagonia, just like how he did in Araucania. On one occasion, he got captured by one of the tribes, and by pure coincidence, one of the Mapuche chiefs was traveling near the area and recognized his king and immediately rescued him. They would later cross the Andes Mountains and re-enter the Chilean-occupied Araucania. The king was finally back in business, and only to his detriment was the situation far worse than he could have imagined. As it turned out, he missed out on some events. A lot of events. During his absence, the tribes rebelled against the Chileans multiple times. One time, his pal Quilipan successfully took up arms to defeat the forces of Colonel Saavedra during the Battle of Quecheraguas in 1868. All these attempts have naturally resulted in brutal crackdowns that basically destroyed any will of resistance the natives had. As for the Mapuche themselves, they were apparently quite happy to see their king alive, especially since they were told that he was killed after Colonel Saavedra captured him. Tounen did not waste any time, and he quickly got back to work on building his kingdom. He even would go on to establish his own royal order with a badass name to be the foundation of his kingdom, the Order of the Steel Crown, modeled after the Grand Order of the Knights of Malta. He then sent out copies of the tricolor royal flag across Araucania to rally the Mapuche tribes. And despite the fact that the region was already pacified by the time Tounen arrived, his arrival ended up causing a massive wave of upheaval among the Mapuche. After realizing that this mad Frenchman was not joking around, Colonel Saavedra started to sweat. He reached out to the tribal chiefs and tried to gather them all in the region of Tolton to pursue them away from a rebellion, and even offered a bounty for Tounen's head. He failed. Colonel Saavedra then would send an ultimatum to Chief Quilipan to surrender Tounen within 15 days, or hell would break out. He failed again. It was alleged that Saavedra was so furious and annoyed with Tounen by this point that he carried a basket filled with sawdust in case he ever got the chance of getting Tounen's decapitated head. Tounen yet again called out to the French government for assistance, and to his surprise, the French ships did actually arrive, and immediately left, leaving no support behind whatsoever. Yeah, despite the fact some of the highest-ranking officials were on board, they couldn't get Napoleon III on board for some reason, which is strange considering the number of foreign adventures he supported over the course of 20 years. Like, this was probably the least risky adventure of his reign, and he was good on it. But oh well. Anyway, the Mapuche were forced to fight on their own, and Tounen went full Heart of Darkness mode and basically led a guerrilla campaign with his Mapuche army for the next 2 years. And despite being partially successful, they were eventually overwhelmed by the Chileans. Meanwhile, back at home in 1871, Napoleon III got dragged into a war against the Germans, which resulted in the Second French Empire getting annihilated. And with that, any hopes of receiving support were out of the window. Tounen was finally forced to leave his kingdom in shame and went into exile in Argentina and returned to France in the same year. He returned to trying to find sponsors and publishing propaganda in his newspaper. He began to lose his sanity more and more as he struggled to garner more attention from the French public as they continued mocking him. But does that mean he would finally give up this time? No. 1874. Now banned from both Argentina and Chile because of his shenanigans, Tounen decided to sneak into Patagonia incognito this time. He gathered his buddies, took a fake identity, clipped his beard, and even wore dark glasses to avoid detection. They secretly set sail on a ship. He was confident, so confident in fact that he brought money minting and printing equipment with him on the ship. But sadly for him, he was so popular in Patagonia by now that the officer at the port quickly recognized him and seized his ship. After 3 months of arrest, a slap in the back, and a little warning, he was sent back to France. Tounen now had hit rock bottom. He was poor in both finances and health. He never had a family of his own, so he relied on his siblings for survival. For a rational man, this would be the end of the story, as he would give his dreams a rest and try to make the best of his remaining days. 1876. The 51-year-old Tounen would try his luck again for one final time. With what little money he had, he went to Montevideo, Uruguay. He then snuck into the Argentinian border and made his way to Patagonia in secret. Everything proceeded as planned, and at that moment, he believed he might succeed in reaching Patagonia. But come on, you know how this ends. Look at the world map today. Do you see an independent country here? Exactly. He was robbed by local settlers and was handed over to the authorities. But he was given permission to settle in Patagonia for the time being, since he was literally dying of disease by this point. After going to Buenos Aires for surgery, that would extend his life a little more. Tounen then would be shipped back to France for the final time. The last candle of resistance in Araucania would be wiped out in a brutal revolt in 1881, as the region would be under brutal military occupation until 1883, when the region was truly integrated into Chile proper. And on September 17, 1878, alone and poor, Antoine de Tounens passed away at the age of 53. He was never married and had no children, nor had any appointed successor. But this wouldn't stop his friend Achille Lavillard from scooping up the crown after his death and declaring himself the new king of this non-existent kingdom. From that point onward, the crown would be tossed around among upper-income French people like a game of handball. And funnily enough, the throne of the Kingdom of Araucania and Patagonia still exists, and so does the Order of the Steel Crown. They too are still around apparently. And they are having some internal dramas going on very recently according to their website, which looks like this. Currently, they are being led by Prince Philippe III as the throne pretender since 2024. We wish His Majesty the greatest of luck in his quest to destroy the unholy countries of Chile and Argentina. Amen. In general, Tounens' story is one of tragedy that happens to be a bit crazy by nature. He had surprisingly benevolent intentions for a man living in the 19th century and going through numerous adventures. During my research, I couldn't encounter anything that I would say was morally unjustifiable. And sure, the Chileans considered him to be an agent of the French Empire and was evil from the get-go, but he wasn't even that. Believe it or not, Tounens wasn't the only guy in the 19th century who tried to wander off and found his own country. In America, there was even a term for it, filibustering. But unlike other wannabe rulers who were in it just for the sake of glory or riches, Tounens genuinely cared for the natives and considered their treatment to be morally wrong. He didn't try to enforce his customs on the natives and in fact willingly adopted their customs. He spent his days collecting fruits and hunting like a Mapuche. He dressed like one, listened to the stories of elders, and even groomed himself just like a Mapuche. But my God, he was so crazy. So much so that perhaps the only real obstacle to achieving his goal was probably himself. Nevertheless, he is still venerated by some Mapuche for being someone who stood up for their rights when nobody else did. One can only wonder if things were only a little bit different, but that's for another day's topic. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.